Today is all about finding solutions and taking action to create a tomorrow better than today. Today has been a big day in numerous ways, and all of it truly starts here, today, now. And one thing that I always think about is that tomorrow has to be better for all of us. If it's just better for me and not for you, then nothing's really, no action is being taken. So that is why we've gathered this group, this panel of amazing change makers to talk about how they're creating change through action, specifically around the work of creating food security and justice for everyone in their communities. And we hope this conversation inspires you to take some action too. So let's get started. I have never facilitated an online panel. I'm going to do my best. How I think it's going to go is we'll make one panelist round and then open the conversation for questions. So as we're speaking, please add questions or comments to the chat. I have a lovely facilitator, Jessie, out there that can help me. But then once everybody's talked a little bit, we'll start answering some of your questions as well. So I'll get started. I'm Jennifer Thomas. I am the co-founder and board chair for Casey Farm School at Gibbs Road and a science teacher at Turner High School here in Wyandotte County, or KCK. I also live here. I transplanted to KCK about 16 years ago, and I happily live my life within about 5 square miles. I live over here, the farm's in the middle, and then I work over here. So the farm is squarely in the center of my life right now. And once I moved here, and especially through my work with the farm, I have learned about the enormous challenges that my neighbors, my students, my friends face in this community. So 31% of the families here with children face food insecurity. And it's kind of a note of my privilege. I've never really had to worry about where my food's coming from or if I'm going to be able to eat. So that really became a burden to me to think about my neighbors and students and friends facing that. Health outcomes here are amongst the worst in the state of Kansas. And the average median household income in Wyandotte County is $40,000 less than the county right next door, literally blocks away from where I sit at home. So anyway, some people even call my home here a frontline community. I actually heard this used less than a year ago, and it's stuck with me because I picture it as all of these people I love and care about engaging in a battle that they didn't choose to be a part of. So as I work with my beautiful students and my loving neighbors, I every day hope to work to win this war with them and ultimately for them. So this is really heavy, but there is hope because all those facts and figures diminish when we are working together, specifically for me, when we are like hands in soil, working together to grow, eating together, breaking bread together, and meeting each other where we are with our whole selves. So solutions are at hand. As an educator a few years ago with no knowledge of gardening or farming, I started a garden at school. Didn't know what I was doing, crabgrass everywhere, but I was like, we need to figure out where food comes from. Let's go figure it out. So my students learned obviously some science and agriculture, but more importantly, care, patience, and resilience. You know, if we fail, we're gonna try again, and we might get some food out of it. So my students are pretty funny about it. They don't all love the food that we pull out of the earth, but they try it, which is a great first step. And at least now they know partially where it's coming from. I take my students to the farm. I think that's a strong first step to food security when they can see a working farm and how all of that works. So knowing where their food comes from, how to grow it is a pretty simple solution, especially when education is embedded around both of those. And of course, the solutions abound at Casey Farm School at Gibbs Road. We've tried to create a space that's literally the center of the community where everyone is invited to get on farm hands-on, regardless of age, ability, ancestry, or who they love. So our farm moves 7,000 pounds of nutritionally dense vegetables and staples from our partners and friends in the KC Food Hub, other Wyandotte County farmers, friends with small businesses. And we move that food into the community through our on-farm market. We don't take our market to another city. We keep it here in KCK so the access is more available. We invite gleaners in. You're going to hear from a gleaner friend in a moment. And obviously, whatever isn't selling or anything, we just get it out to the community through donations. We make it accessible and affordable by using a pay what you're able model that kind of sprung from our current farmer, Sharon Autry. And because community members said that's something they needed. So we really strive to work with our community instead of just doing things for them. We use barter agreements. If you have time, talent, or energy, we want to feed you. Even if we're not bartering officially, we want to feed you. So anybody that comes to the farm gets food. And one of my favorite programs, we've developed some food sovereignty opportunities through programs, well, from 4 to 100-year-olds through Let's Grow Wyandotte, where we provided gardens for our neighbors and friends to grow food in their own backyard. But we also provided weekly community check-ins, and we all share our gardens and successes and failures. And for many, it's the first time they've grown food in their own, by their own hand, in their own space. So that's a pretty powerful thing as well. So access to food, in my opinion, is a basic human right. And together, and especially with these people that you're about to meet, we are finding many solutions to make it so. So I invite you to add questions and comments to the chat. And I'm going to wrap up. And let's hear from our friends. Mark, you're who I see mainly on my screen. Do you want to kick us off next? Tell us who you are.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much, Jennifer. My name is Mark Manning, and I am the coordinator of the KCK Organic Teaching Gardens. We've been operating for about 20 years in schools in KCK, and people ask me if I'm a master gardener, and I always jokingly tell them that I'm a theater major. And that usually makes people look a little confused and we laugh, but my background is actually in theater, and I worked in professional theater in Kansas City for a number of years, and sometimes I still do, but not as much since I've been involved in the gardens. But I met a woman named Marsha Pomeroy who was doing programming in KCK in schools, and she had developed relationships with schools that wanted to have a garden at their school, but they didn't have the resources or people to take care of it. So I had met her and become a Vista doing a literacy program with her. And she knew that I had a big garden in my front yard. And I come from farming people in Nebraska. Most of my ancestors are poor immigrant farmers. And I always gardened in my own house, but I did it for therapy. It was like my therapy. But anyway, she tapped me on my shoulder and asked me if I'd be willing to coordinate a project. And so we created this project basically out of nothing. And we got a grant from the Kauffman Foundation in 2000 to help launch us. And we created a garden program where we built raised bed organic garden on the school grounds of 4 elementary schools and 3 middle schools in KCK. And we tried to do 3 plantings a year, not always possible, but we at least would do a spring planting and then a harvest and then a summer planting and then a fall harvest. If we can sometimes do a fall planting and a fall harvest too, but it's not always possible to do that. And then people on our advisory board who were working at the EPA really recommended that I create a curriculum to go with the gardens that were on the school grounds so that we could connect what's happening outside with the classroom inside. And so we did that, and it was a real organic process. We started with creating a worm workshop and doing worm composting and talking about recycling and composting. And then from that, we created a salsa workshop where we make salsa and we tell the history of tomatoes and peppers and where they really can't come from and how they've been brought up through our history. And we were able to kind of deal with cultural issues in the school with Latin history and African history and American history all kind of woven together through plants, you know? And then we also started growing sweet potatoes. That's our biggest crop that we grow, mainly to have a lot of our summer school activity was being erased in the school system. And so we had to create a crop that students could plant in May and come back in the fall and harvest. And so we do a sweet potato workshop and we tell the history of sweet potatoes and we make sweet potato French fries right in the classroom. We have a whole 9 to 10 month curriculum that we do every year with about 1,300 students in first, fourth, and sixth grade. We work with about 26 different teachers at the 7 schools. We set up a schedule. I end up personally doing about 50 classes a month. And every month is a different workshop. So it's a lot of volume. There's a lot of trying to reach as many students as we can. And our whole objective is to try to connect what their curriculum is in first grade or fourth grade or sixth grade to the garden itself and try to reinforce those benchmarks that they're learning in their classroom, help the garden help do that. But in the process, get their fingers in the ground, planting seeds, growing food, harvesting food, and eating that food that they planted and harvested, and showing that whole cycle and trying to reinforce where food really comes from. And it's been like Jennifer, at first I didn't know what I was doing. I was just, you know, and the garden, I always like to tell people the garden will teach you, you know, you can just start gardening, go out and put a seed in the ground. And it of course, there's lots of places to learn, but the garden itself will also teach you. And so we call our gardens teaching gardens. And they're really just examples to the students in their schools of what they can do, because all of our gardens were built by the students at the schools and all planted by the students at their schools. And so they do take great ownership and also sharing this garden. So this year we harvested about, let's see here, we harvested 1,860 pounds of sweet potatoes and we gave all of them away. It was about $3,700 worth of organic sweet potatoes that we gave away to all the neighborhoods around the garden. And we do that with all the spring, when we grow lettuce and spinach and radish and cool weather crops in the spring, the students literally have planted that and then they harvest that and take all that home to their families, bags of lettuce. And we estimate that each year we give away between $8,000 and $10,000 worth of food that we know of back to our neighborhoods around our gardens. And we operate the whole program on a shoestring budget, and I'm kind of a solo agent that does this. And I've developed relationships with teachers and principals and students for about 20 years now that have been so positive and have taught me, the students have taught me how to do a better workshop every year that I do that. And it's just been a really amazing journey in collaboration of trying to show people where their food really comes from and the benefits of eating food that we grow ourselves, and just, you know, like a sweet potato, how healthy it can be to actually eat just a sweet potato itself. You know, those are the kind of things that we try to teach. Did I go over 5 minutes? I'm sorry.
You're good. Thank you, Mark.
Sure, thank you.
Teaching them, doing more than trying. You are doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, who should we have next? Jerry, do you want to talk for a few minutes about who you are and what you do
here? Sure. I'm Jerry Jones, and I am the Director of Community Health at Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas City. I grew up in the Dot, born and raised. I tell people that my first breath was Kansas City, Kansas, and God willing, yeah, I'm on the Missouri side now, but my last breath will be KCK. I love being from the Dot. I'm glad to be here. So I'm here. I look at food primarily from the health perspective, and even more importantly, like as an equity issue. As a director of community health, our role really is to identify where disparities and more specifically inequities in health exist, and really try to work in community to develop solutions. And one of the things that we're currently doing right now is supporting an effort being led by the Community Health Council of Wyandotte County and the University of Kansas Health System, and really exploring the intersection of food and chronic disease management. So funding a 2-year initiative where not only are the hospital and the organization, and for full disclosure, I used to run the Community Health Council of Wyandotte County for about 6 years before moving over to Blue. The intersection, not only introducing access to healthy food for individuals who are struggling with managing diabetes and hypertension, but also looking at what the role of food is as it relates to community, in understanding community context, understanding the cultural connection to food, cultural sensitivity, and really looking at how health systems might begin to practice a level of not only cultural competence, but cultural humility as it relates to introducing food as medicine. But more importantly, from the health insurance perspective, part of our mission is to begin to, and if we can begin to prove the concept that food is medicine, and really looking at how we might begin to treat food in the same way that we might treat insulin or laprinicil for hypertension, and really begin to treat non-traditional forms of treatment as something that we would consider medicine and treatment. So we're really excited about what we're starting to learn from that. Additionally, looking at food as an equity issue, really, I think it's been highlighted during the pandemic, just what the impact of not having equitable access to food means based on economics. And what we're seeing is that a lot of Black folks are having more likely to have an adverse effect to a COVID diagnosis. Unfortunately, we're seeing higher proportions of people who are Black dying from COVID. And what we're recognizing is that these deaths aren't because we're Black. It has nothing to do with the fact that we're Black. What it has to do with is the pre-existing conditions. So diabetes, hypertension. And the reason why we're seeing higher prevalences of that is through it's one of the byproducts of years of structural racism, where there are inadequate resources, inadequate access to employment, which will lead to the inadequate access to the finances that are necessary to acquire healthy food and sustainable food. And as we see that over a prolonged period of time, several decades, we're starting to see the byproduct of structural racism creating inequitable access, which then creates chronic conditions, which then lead to, when introduced with the virus, we're seeing these adverse effects and unfortunately prolonged death. So we are very much looking at creating equitable access to food as a way of beginning to address the things that we see in front of us, which are the disparities in health outcomes. So improving the control of diabetes and hypertension, but also moving up that ladder from just addressing disparities to ultimately identifying, addressing, and eliminating inequity. And food is, access to food for us is a major component in that effort.
Thank you, Jerry. Kendall, would you like to speak next? Are you ready?
Sure. If I start breaking up, just let me know. I'm sitting right now in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I just moved. My partner got a job here, so there's wet paint and boxes all around me. And we live in a rural area, so we also get our internet from satellite. So it's an adjustment for sure. But I'm in Charlottesville now, but I grew up in the suburbs of Kansas City. I grew up in Prairie Village, not that far from the farm at Gibbs Road, and my mom, has introduced me to the farm. I went to school at the University of Kansas, so the area is always near and dear to my heart. But after I finished school, I moved to the Bay Area, and I moved there right after the financial crisis, and so that was largely sort of where, I guess, if you want to say, where or how were you radicalized, I would say that living through the financial crisis and being on SNAP myself, and also living in Oakland, where a group like the Black Panthers really made the connection between food access and racial justice really clear with the breakfast program. So I've always been interested, as Jerry was alluding to, food as an issue of health and justice. I also think that it's a huge source of pleasure for people as well. I think it's incredibly important in our lives. I eventually sort of frustrated with the economy and wanting to do something that was really near to me. I became a chef, actually. I cooked in Kansas City for a little while, but I moved to New Orleans, and I was working in fine dining. I kind of saw a little bit the writing on the wall in terms of the economics sort of owning your own restaurant, and a little bit of the futility in terms of making sort of widespread change. And so I eventually moved from cooking into organizing, and I was working with fishermen on the Gulf Coast. We were trying to do some of that stuff where you're shortening the supply chain and doing policy advocacy to try to make it easier on food producers, but from the fishing and perspective, which is a little bit different from farming, but a lot of the issues are the same. I also, through my work at an organization called Healthy Gulf, I was working with people in Cancer Alley who were on rural land, and that land was being developed for large petrochemical plants. We were trying to stop some of that. A lot of the residents talked about what it was like to have their land poisoned, where people used to sort of catch their own fish, grow their own pecan trees, and to have large scale petrochemical facilities sort of come in was really sort of devastating, just from a health and property value sense, but also sort of food access. And as I was working in environmental organizing, I had this law degree. I was getting involved in the climate movement more. Again, my partner decided to go back to school, so she got into Vermont Law School, and I decided to sort of try to put everything together in terms of what I'd been learning about the food system and what I'd been learning about policy. So I'm getting an advanced degree in food and agriculture policy. I'll be done in December, and then I will hopefully go into some sort of political or agency work sort of after that. But I would say that the more that I've gotten to understand the food system, in some cases these issues are incredibly complicated, but in another sense, they're incredibly simple. And when we talk about food access, what we're really talking about here is poverty. And so I am, you know, I'm working on a paper right now about food deserts, and really what we're talking about is that people are poor. You know, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to downplay transportation issues, but the fact is, people, people find ways to get to stores, you know, if they want them. And a lot of times, people talk about, oh, well, you know, try to talk about this in terms of cultural issues or things like that. But survey after survey shows that people, when money becomes tight, they choose less healthy food. And it has nothing to do with any sort of preference or anything like that. It has to do with the fact that people do not have money. And a lot of times we in the food movement are, I think, start to sort of freak out when people point out that local food is sort of more expensive. And we sort of talk about, well, how can we make food less expensive or something like that? And what I think, if anything, as I've come to understand the food movement more, is that what we really need is to argue is that we need poor people to have more money. And I wrote an article about this recently. So with whether it comes to restaurants, whether it comes to fishermen, or whether it comes to farmers, people sort of really have a sense that you know, that we're competing with cheap food, and that we need to somehow figure out a way to sort of compete with that. Well, I would argue what we all need to be doing, sort of as a movement, is to really sort of start to identify ourselves with the broader sort of left movement that is concerned with economic and racial justice. And I think the food movement has a tendency to sort of silo itself off, or not think of itself as part of this broader movement. But I would say, if anything, we need to align ourselves, we need more allies, and we need to think of food not as sort of a separate issue from all of this, but fully sort of embrace that. And God knows I've worked with enough farmers and fishermen to know that lots of people who are within this movement and have just great ideas about food and farming and all that don't see themselves a part of that. You know, I mean, we're today of all days, especially when we're seeing the defeat of Donald Trump, is I know a lot of farmers and fishermen who align with that, and I think that a lot of times we're really uncomfortable talking about politics as a food movement, and I think that needs to end. And so those are some of the things that I'm thinking about, and I look forward to talking about all these issues with a lot of our fellow panelists.
Thank you for joining us, Kendall. So far we've heard from educators, we've heard from the healthcare world, policy work, and backyard gardens, teaching gardens. And so now we have two more panelists, and I think I'm going to have Tekia take it away.
Oh, okay. I'm ready. I think so. Can you hear me okay? I don't know. I have a new headset in, so that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me, and just I'm soaking in all of this goodness. It's been such an amazing day so far, but also like to hear from everyone. But my name is Tekia Thompson, and everyone usually calls me T because they never get my name right. I don't know. So feel free to call me T. But I am a gleaning coordinator with After the Harvest KC here in the greater Kansas City area. And if you don't know about After the Harvest or what a gleaner does, I have to explain it all the time, so it's okay. But our goal is to deliver hope and help, basically. And so we are in the process of going out, working with farmers and growers to deliver healthy food to our hungry neighbors. And we do that by working with the farmers and growers who maybe have some produce that they haven't harvested everything, they have some left for us to harvest, or maybe they've gotten everything and they just have the produce ready to go for us to pick up. So that's kind of the main way I'm involved with After the Harvest as a gleaning coordinator. And I just really love my job. I love what I do with that. I love that I get to work with families in our community. And I think part of it that's really spurred it for me is I was on the other side of that. I think, Kendall, you mentioned like being on SNAP. I've been in line. I've had to figure out like, oh, do I get the apples or do I get the 5 banquet meals that are cheaper? And, really, stretch those dollars out and try to figure out how to make that work. And I feel like it shouldn't be that way. There should be access. There should be opportunity to have those things. And so I work really closely with our farmers and our growers to do that. I also get to be a part of a community garden expansion in Lenexa area. It's called Jubilee. And so working with them and kind of helping them to navigate that and to figure out how, they're figuring out how to get the produce to those communities in need. So that's been really important to me. But I think what drives me, you mentioned, Jennifer, at one point, like the access to hope and health and happiness. And food is my love language. I know that's not an official love language in the 5 love languages book or whatever. Maybe it is, I don't know. But food is my love language, and feeding people good things, giving them good things is how I let people know that I care, that I love them, that I'm so happy they're a part of my life. And I truly believe that in the work that I'm doing as a gleaner, I am reminding people in our community that maybe they're underserved, or maybe they've been on the outs, or whatever the case is. I'm reminding them that they have value, that they are valid, that they are worthy, that they are just an active and beautiful part of the community that we live in. And I think that I do that by going out there. My body yells at me a lot when I'm gleaning. It's not easy. Gleaning is not for the faint of heart. but I'm reminded of all the different people that we get to serve, and that we get to bless through gleaning. And one of the things I always mention, and if you were on the panel early this morning with Emily Brown, she talked about the table and being at the table and all the beautiful things that happen at a table, right? And I believe that if you're invited to someone's table, that's a big deal. You're getting this invitation. And so when I'm working with teams in the field, I always tell them, today, you're not just gleaning, you're not just volunteering. We're not just out here getting, produce or getting these things or whatever. Today, you are extending your table. Today, you are going out there with me, leading you, working with the farmer or the grower or whoever the case may be. And we are getting this produce for the families, and you are inviting them to your table today. So think about each and every person that's going to get that apple or that ear of corn, and think about what you would want to present them at your table. And I think it really shifts a lot of people's mindset when they come out in the field, because sometimes they're like, well, this will work, or this looks good. But when you tell them that person is coming to your table today, they really put forth a lot of effort to get as much as they can, to get all the good stuff that they can. And I think, for us, we're working to give our community access to something that they should already have access to, right? So I'm really excited to learn from all of you. I geek out when it comes to food and feeding people and figuring out how to do things. And I may not have a lot of talents and a lot of fancy degrees, but friends, I can move some food and I can get you some food. So, so I'm really excited to learn from all of you. So thank you so much for having me.
Yes, T, thank you for being here.
Sure.
And last, but certainly not least, we have our friend Brett coming to us live from somewhere beautiful.
Everywhere is beautiful today, right? All in all. Feels that way here anyway. Yeah, good to be with you all today. Yeah, my name is Brett Ramey. I'm talking today from Dakota homelands here in what's now Minneapolis. But my family's from Northeast Kansas, from Brown County area, both from the Iowa reservation and then from a smaller town called Robinson. And so I still have family in both of those areas, just about 80 miles upstream from you all there, right along the Missouri rivers where our tribe is at now. And actually a lot of the Platte River region, that was also Iowa lands until about 1836, when they signed a treaty that then relocated us to where our current reservation area is now. So if we're talking about St. Joe, if we're talking about KCI, those areas were solidly Iowa homelands until about 150 years or so ago. So just glad to be able to reconnect with you all, if not virtually, in the places where my ancestors call home. I also went to school in Lawrence, went to Haskell, went to KU, both, and so got a lot of my education of the world just down or upstream and from the Kansas River, from where many of you are all today. Might get a little bit more into some of the good things my tribe is doing right now, related to regenerative agriculture, beekeeping, setting up tribal national parks, things like that. But otherwise, just want to kind of center what I'll offer today from here in Dakota homelands along the Mississippi. And so more specifically where I am today, I'm about a mile west of the Mississippi River, about 2 miles downstream from downtown Minneapolis, about a mile east of the Minneapolis American Indian Center, which I'll talk about a bit more, and then about 6 blocks north of the 3rd Precinct, where the uprising set off at the wake of the murder of George Floyd back in June. So the helicopters, I don't think you can hear them anymore. I think they're out monitoring celebrations, but for much of the summer, they were monitoring uprisings. And so kind of that's where the work that I'll share about is kind of centered from today. And also just to name, it's for me, it's really important to always kind of orient geographically where I might be speaking from, not just for the sake of acknowledging lands and the peoples whose lands I'm on alone, which is important, but also just as a step to ensure that I don't continue to erase peoples whose land, ultimately the food that we're all talking about is coming from. And so that's just for me, like just a common practice that I've come to really value. And so just thinking, a little bit more about the specifics of this conversation today, which is kind of centered around this idea of Indigenous presence, but as it relates to like food and restaurants. So since the early days of the pandemic, starting late April, there's been a crew out of the Gatherings Cafe within the American Indian Center who's been feeding elders, between 150 and 200 elders lunches every day. And I was able to come on and support those efforts in mid-May. And so for me, just like, having just moved here in January from Coast Salish lands in Seattle, really just wanted to just kind of show up as kind of a newcomer to a new place, and just see where I can be useful, right? And so that led me to this amazing group of people out at Gatherings Cafe who are really doing a lot of work to put Indigenous cuisine back on the map, because it's always been here. It just has been not presenced and intentionally suppressed, of course, too. But just amazing group of people, primarily traditional foods coming out of that kitchen, and then also being able to nourish elders in the wake of the pandemic. And so just really seeing how we can offer that, as Jerry was saying, offer that food as medicine to support the elders who have been supporting this community in Minneapolis for so long. And the other thing that was also happening is during the early days of the uprisings, the kitchen kind of pivoted from feeding the elders to feeding a lot of the AIM patrol, the American Indian Movement, who was holding down in those days when things were just really hot. They were patrolling the neighborhoods around Franklin Ave, the American Indian Center, and just kind of ensuring that the native corridor there was kind of safe from the white nationalists, from quote unquote riots, all of those things. And so if you're able to look at a map around where a lot of the crime and different things were happening in those days, you'll see the circle around the American Indian Center where there's just nothing going on. And that's because the American Indian Movement was there patrolling, as they've been doing off and on for 50 years when they started in response to police violence here in the Twin City areas. And so just really fortunate and grateful to be able to contribute to feeding them and keeping them going as they protected the community all night long. And so I think, I can share a little bit more about how that goes if we circle back around to it, but we also benefited a lot from gleaners. So I was really excited to have a gleaner on the call, Tekia. So we have a couple different folks, and organizations. Twin Cities Food Justice has been a big one that brings, produce and other things weekly, and it's really been keeping us stocked with tons of good produce, tons of good, just everything, right? And so just really appreciate the efforts of the gleaners of the world, absolutely. And I thought I did before, but I didn't realize, what a critical role that is, just to make sure that the food that is plentiful gets distributed to folks need it, and just folks, period, because otherwise so much just otherwise gets wasted. And we don't want to like minimize all the labor that goes in that, make sure that it gets utilized. So we're able to benefit from those efforts. And the other thing I wanted to say too, just kind of related to food, is that we can't also forget to mention the land itself. And so a lot of the work that I get to contribute to here and other places around, Indigenous presence in on environment and conservation scenes. And so for me, that then extends to thinking about, how we reinstate, land management practices of our communities, Indigenous or otherwise, who might have ways of caretaking for lands that aren't based solely in Western science alone, because we know that's largely been inadequate to really address the challenges we face to the health of lands and waters in our human communities as well. And so what does it look like to put some of those practices back into place, to take over management of those prairies, of those wetlands, of those woodlands that were the original community gardens, before colonization came and put forward this idea that food grows in these boxes over here or in these straight rows over here, but instead remind everyone that actually, the wetlands are food producing areas, the prairies, and all of these things. And if we can start to think that way again by represencing Indigenous peoples and our practices, then we can ensure the health of the lands where all of our food ultimately grows from into the future. And so I think I'll just kind of offer that much for now. But thank you all for joining today. This is such a good day to celebrate and be with y'all.
It is. Thank you very much, Brett. I think we've heard from everybody and we have about 15 minutes left. Are there questions from the audience or panelists? Do you have questions for each other? If you do, feel free to unmute. I'll keep an eye on the chat. I know, so much good stuff was shared. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Brett really touched on something that I think is really important, and especially someone who's worked for environmental organizations, is that I feel like that we really sort of have this sense that a lot of people sort of have this sense that humans and nature and food production are somewhat sort of incompatible. Whereas I think that Brett is sort of hinting at that we need to move to a place where we are sort of incorporating more food production, but also doing food production in a way that is more sort of harmonious with the earth. But I just think that mentality is missing a lot sort of within what a lot of traditional environmentalism sort of gets at. So I just wanted to just, I guess, be really excited for a second to hear Brett talk about that, because that's something that I'm really.
Thank you for that. There is comments from Lydia, I believe our own board member, KC Farm School board member, says she would love to hear more from Tekia. So Tekia, everybody wants to hear from you. And then there's a question for Brett. And then Don has a question.
Well, I don't know what more you would like to hear from me, but but I know Kendall had a question for Brett. I think in terms of just how we, and just listening to all of you and how we work, I talk a lot about like ending silos and ending this, and I think you all kind of mentioned it, but it's not working. Okay, it's not working. We have to figure out this way to communicate and work together. We are desperate for community, and I truly believe that this is the way we do it. And food is a builder. Food is the ultimate bridge builder. It is the ultimate wall breaker, right? I mean, you may disagree on everything under the sun, but you can sit at a table and enjoy a good meal and realize, oh, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good meal. Well, we have something we agree on, right? We have something we can talk about, and it goes on from there. And so for me, it's about building a table, extending your table, making room at your table for people, and in all the different ways that we do that with, like I said, reminding people who they are and how much value they have to the community. And so I love hearing about all the things like Brett, when you were talking about cooking for your elders, I was like, I'm getting misty. Yes, this is so great, because that's what we should be doing. We should be looking to how we can pour into our talents and do those kinds of things. And so I don't want to take up too much time because I know there are specific questions for Brett and Kendall, but just be reminded of the fact, or be mindful of the fact that we cannot do this apart. We are meant to be community. We are meant to work together harmoniously. And I think that we can do that if we just kind of all sit down at the table and look at, we have a right hand and our left hand, and, we have them for a reason, and, they're doing two different things, but they're working together, right? So I think that we have this opportunity to really build on what we're doing today. So thanks so much.
Thank you. So Brett, do you want to respond to Kendall? And then there's also a question from Alicia that says, Brett, how do we bring all that we know together with all that we hope?
Yeah, I think I'll try on that. Sorry, I'm not seeing the one from Kendall, but yeah, Alicia, that's one to think for a while for sure. And I think the first thing comes to mind is to just always enter, for me, like with the idea that I actually don't know all that much. And I think especially right now, as we're seeing basically how this win was delivered to us by the organizing from BIPOC communities around the country, from Georgia to Native communities, and just really what we seek to gain from getting out of the way, from frontline communities who really seek to both not only lose the much ultimately, as speaking of kind of Jerry's naming some of the inequities in health over time, but really have the most to contribute to building the new world that we need to see. And so I think it's really just ultimately about like humbling ourselves to realize we don't actually know that much about what's needed right now necessarily, but that there are a lot of people leading the way who do. And it's really just a matter of like getting out of the way of, I would offer, BIPOC-led organizations and individuals just to show us the way forward. And ultimately that'll get us to what I think many of us are hoping for now, which is healthy communities and futures for everyone.
Thank you. Dawn has a question. Do we have any ideas how to cross the state lines to serve communities throughout the greater Kansas City area? Any comments or questions about that? How to expand opportunities and impact?
More gleaners.
More farmers, right?
More gleaners, more farmers, more growing, more understanding of who we are and where we are, and where we've come from, and how to move forward from there. But yeah.
Awesome. Any last questions?
Could I ask a question to to my fellow panelists as well?
Yes.
Which is, where do you see government, I guess, either state, local, or federal, either as a way to sort of help or as a way to sort of get out of the way? What do you think are some of the things that government could do to either help or get out of the way, especially looking forward to, as we're going to possibly be welcoming in, or it seems like definitely welcoming in, a new federal administration?
I'd say from a state level, I think removing the sales tax on produce might be a really good start for that. I also believe that there should be an equitable subsidy policy at the federal level to support, local growers, as opposed to the giveaways they're giving to big food industries. I think that would be a huge thing at a federal level if there was an equitable subsidy policy at that level.
Thank you. Anybody else have an answer for that?
Yeah, I'll just offer just around tribal governments as well, just to always remember that there are tribal governments amongst us as well, and just ways in which treaties, and especially in some parts of the countries, really serve to leadership when federal, state, county often don't, especially as it relates to land-based issues. So Washington State, perfect example, if you look at like ways that their treaties uphold access to fish rights. Similar in Minnesota, which I'm still learning, but really just to see that there are other governments in place that can actually circumvent in ways these other entities that haven't really been necessarily serving us for a while.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes left, and to close it up, I would like each of the panelists just to give one action step that anybody watching this or anybody that watches it in the future can do today, tomorrow, next week to take action around food security, environmental protection, whatever your cause is. So I'll lead us off. Obviously, KC Farm School, you can donate time, energy, talent, or money. We are running like a text to give promotion right now, which will show up in a minute. You could show up Sunday morning and plant garlic with us to ensure we have a 2021 crop of garlic. And you can grow a garden. Easy action steps to secure your own food, if not help feed your neighbors as well. Oh, we're screen sharing.
Oh my gosh, I'm next. I just saw it says up next, colorful conversations. I'm like, that's me, I have to go.
Great. So we'll wrap this up. Quick action steps. Tekia, you wanna?
Yes, I will go and then I will hop off so I can get ready for the next session. I would obviously say visit www.aftertheharvestkc.org to learn about what we do at After the Harvest and Gleaning. But may I just throw this out there? If you are working with organizations like After the Harvest, a farmer, or you're giving food, if you're donating food, whatever you're doing, the one piece I've noticed is that a lot of people they will look at something and they will say, I don't know how to prep this, I don't know what to do with this, and then it goes away. So if you have that knowledge of how to easily meal prep, how to educate someone on how to store food easily when they don't have a lot of equipment, when they have minimal access to spices and things like that, please, please, please offer that information, offer that education to them in whatever way you can, because I think we do our friends and our family and the community that we are serving the produce to, at least I do, a disservice if we just hand them these things and say, okay, we've done our part, good luck. You know, if we can give them that extra bit of education for things that they may have never seen that you know, they've never had on their plate before, I think that would go a long way as well.
That's great.
So, thank you guys so much. You all are awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tekia.
Mark, one action step?
Yeah, just planting a garden and going out and doing that, or maybe starting a compost and a worm compost. We don't usually ask for volunteers a lot because we have students doing a lot of their work in our schools, but this year has been different. So we've had a lot of volunteers come in to help us build our reset garden. And so if you can help in your neighborhood, maybe do a community garden, that would be a great action step also.
Thank you. Brett?
Yeah, and this is actually something I kind of learned from Soulfire Farms. I believe you got a representative from them, and they have worked with the Stockbridge Muncie Band of Mohican, whose land they're on, to actually put in place a cultural, I think it's like a cultural respect easement, something like that, where they're actually working with the tribe who's now been relocated to Wisconsin, but to come and plant some of their ancestral seeds on Soulfire Farms land. And so I think an action item with that is if you have access to land, find out whose land you're on and work with them to ensure that if they would like to return to their lands in some ways to grow food or otherwise, that you then offer that up to them in a respectful way.
Jerry?
I would say, and it's probably geared anybody who, you know, receives medical care at a traditional doctor's office. to tell your medical professionals that you would like to have food prescribed as medicine, because we listen to that feedback that we get from our provider partners. So, or if you are commercially insured with Blue Cross and Blue Shield, call our customer service department and tell Blue Cross and Blue Shield that you would like to have food covered as a benefit.
Yes, I'll do that today. And last but not least, Kendall, what actions can we take?
All right. So I just want to sort of echo what Tekia was saying earlier about how we really need to break down our silos. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. And I think one of the biggest things that you can do for that is to show up for somebody else. So, for instance, if Brett or whoever your local water protector is or local tribe is having an action related to something related to a pipeline or whatever, show up for that, even if it's not a food issue. Show up for someone else, and then other people will start to show up for you as well. So I think helping people sort of make these connections is one of the most important things that we can do. And the best thing that we can do is to show up for someone else that's sort of outside of whatever our issue is or whatever our comfort zone is. The only way that we're going to do this is all together. And, so yeah, that's what I would say.
We have run out of time. It's exactly 2 o'clock. I am so thankful for all of you for joining me on this panel. I learned a tremendous amount. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And next up is Tekia again, if you did not get enough Tekia, or Loretta Craig talking about human health and soil health and how they're related. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day.